Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
My inbox started blowing up recently with emails from people, and I'm not going to read off all the names. I can't. We haven't got that kind of time. But everyone on the face of the planet sent me this story, and thank you very much. It's one way I can tell that there's a story people are interested in because of how many copies of it I get in my inbox, in my email. But this is a good story involving civil asset forfeiture in that it has a good ending. That it happened at all is the problem, but it's possible. It's possible that as more wins like this happen, the tide will start to change and eventually change might come to this field. So we'll see. But Andrew Weimer wrote a press release for the Institute for Justice headlined, "New Orleans man will get his life savings back. Federal government agrees to dismiss case, clearing his name." I did a video about this story. I'll put a link in the description box below. But this is the man who was traveling to Ohio to look at a truck and made the mistake of bringing cash with him through an airport. And of course, carrying cash in America is not a crime. They just treat it like it is. So Kermit Warren is a New Orleans grandfather and head deacon of his lower 9th Ward church. He'll get his savings back, his life savings, after the federal government agreed to dismiss its civil forfeiture case with prejudice, which means they cannot refile it. That will clear the man's name. And now some people are going to say, Steve, do you need to mention that he's a New Orleans grandfather and the head deacon of a church? Does that matter? Yes, it does. It does. And one of the things that people notice about civil asset forfeiture is they often target people that they think won't fight back or won't be able to make the case like, hey, I'm not a criminal. And so when you hear that the guy is a grandfather and head deacon of his church, you kind of start wondering how that would play out in front of a jury, right? If this went to court, what's the court going to think? When the feds say, we assumed that this man is breaking the law or about to break the law, we have no evidence of it, and then the jury looks at the guy and goes, that's a grandfather who is the head deacon of a church. So there is a reason to mention that, but back in November of 2020, the DEA seized his money at the Columbus, Ohio airport. He had been traveling to inspect a tow truck he was thinking about buying for a scrap business, but he didn't buy the truck, so he still had the money on him. In August, the Institute for Justice, which is a nonprofit public interest law firm that protects property rights nationwide and does very good work, announced that it would defend Kermit's life savings from the federal government's predatory civil forfeiture practices. Now, this man says, I'm relieved. I will finally get my hard-earned savings back after a year of suffering, but what happened to me was wrong. The officers and prosecutors treated me like a criminal when all I was trying to do was improve my business and my life. For a year, they've left me struggling to survive in the pandemic and a hurricane without my savings. I did nothing wrong, but until the law is changed so that everyone is protected, I'm not going to have cash in my house anymore. So a lot of people have said, well, if you don't have cash around, this won't happen to you. Well, if you don't own a home, you'll never be a victim of a burglary. I mean, if you don't own a car, your car will never get stolen. That's not the point. The point is that the government shouldn't be allowed to just take your money and say, prove it's your money. Prove you deserve to get your money back. Prove it's rightfully yours. Prove you're not committing a crime. That's not American. It's anti-American to put the burden of proof on the person who is accused. After they seized the man's cash, the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of Ohio filed a civil forfeiture lawsuit to keep the money. He was never arrested, and he was never charged with any crime. Instead, the complaint was based on vague innuendo and baseless accusations that the money was connected to drugs. After the Institute for Justice agreed to represent Kermit and documented the legitimate purpose for his trip, and the legal sources of the money, prosecutors agreed to dismiss the case. And primarily, they agreed to dismiss it because of the publicity backlash. There's no question that is absolutely true. If there was no publicity about this case, they would not have dropped this. I'm certain of it. This means the government effectively admits that Kermit did nothing wrong and they cannot refile a complaint in the future over this money. So they dismissed it with prejudice, which means they've dismissed it, they cannot refile it. The IJ senior attorney Dan Albin says, we're relieved that Kermit is getting his hard-earned money back, but it's outrageous that he's left destitute for an entire year for no good reason due to the callous, profit-driven actions of DEA and federal prosecutors. His case highlights how the federal government abuses civil forfeiture. It seizes cash in the flimsiest of pretexts, traveling with cash at an airport, and effectively forces people to prove their own innocence to get their money back. And even in a best case scenario, it can take over a year for them to get their property back. And one of the things that the police and the feds are now saying is, if you're traveling with cash, it's an indication you're doing something wrong, because everyone knows you shouldn't travel with cash because we'll take it. So they've actually created their own reason to get you to not carry cash. In other words, bad guys carry cash because they have to. Good guys shouldn't carry cash because it makes you look like a bad guy and we'll take it from you. And everyone should know that by now. Flying domestically with cash is completely legal. Gotta make sure I say it clearly. It is perfectly legal to carry cash domestically. We've talked before about how if you cross a border with cash, if you're coming into America with cash, they actually have a form that you fill out and it'll ask you, are you carrying any cash with you above a certain amount? And if it's above a certain amount, you're forced to declare it, crossing the border. But traveling domestically inside the U.S., there's no law against it. And so in this case, if my memory of the facts is correct, he went through the various checkpoints at the airport and somebody spotted cash. But of course, the DEA is not inside the airport. And so the TSA people tipped off the DEA. Hey, there's some guy carrying cash. There's some guy carrying cash. What was suspicious about him? He was carrying cash. He was going to look at a vehicle to buy. Now, I know some people are going to say, Steve, traveling with cash is stupid. Because number one, this. But number two, when you get there, you can give somebody a money order or a traveler's check or a cashier's check or some kind of other piece of paper. If you show up at my place to buy my vehicle and it's expensive, in fact, if it's anything, you're paying me for something and you want to give me a piece of paper that is not currency, good luck with that because I ain't taking it. No, seriously, this is a cashier's check. Really? You don't have a laser printer at your house and good paper? I take cash. Now you might say, Steve, $75,000 car you're selling there. You expect someone to carry $75,000 in cash? No, I expect them to produce $75,000 in cash. They don't have to fly here with it or drive here with it. So if they say, Steve, I got a money order here, good for $75,000 in cash. I'm going to say, let's go to the bank. You cash it, hand me the cash. Now, of course, they do that. There's a good chance someone's going to tip the cops off that Steve Lehto is carrying $75,000 in cash around in the suitcase. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. The point is that no one in their right mind selling a vehicle will sell it for a cashier's check or a money order or a traveler's check or some other piece of paper that's not cash. And I mean, if you know somebody, that's one thing. Don't get me wrong. If you know somebody, that's one thing. But I'm talking about where you're selling a vehicle and some guy says, I'm flying up from Louisiana and I'm flying to Ohio to look at your tow truck and it's going to be $40,000 in cash. Okay, I'm going to look at it. I'll be prepared to buy it. It doesn't mean I brought a piece of paper. It means I've got cash. Now, again, he didn't have to bring the cash through the airports, but there's no law against doing that. There's no law against doing that. So flying domestically is perfectly legal with cash, but law enforcement routinely seizes large amounts of cash at airports. The Institute for Justice is currently litigating a class action against the DEA and the TSA over the practices of stopping people who are traveling with large amounts of cash and seizing their money without probable cause. While not a named plaintiff in that suit, Kermit is a member of the class and yet another example of how these practices harm innocent people. TSA's and DEA's unconstitutional seize cash practices must end to prevent further abuses like Kermit, said IG attorney Jabba Shivali. Although Kermit will get his money back after a year of struggle, this will keep happening to other flyers until agencies are forced to end their unconstitutional practices. So it's unfortunate. A lot of people, when they hear me do these stories about civil asset forfeiture, say, oh, you shouldn't carry that money. You shouldn't carry that much money with you. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. It's not the point. It's not the point. The point is there's no law against carrying cash. And so when they take it from you, it's wrong. And every time I do this video, someone says, Steve, isn't this a violation of the Fourth Amendment? Is this a violation of the Fifth Amendment? It's a violation of all kinds of stuff. But unfortunately, for hundreds of years, our courts have said, well, you can bring a legal action against a thing or an object. And there may have been a rationale for it back in the old days, but it doesn't and shouldn't apply to people in America who are U.S. citizens traveling with U.S. currency in their possession, which is perfectly legal, and for the powers that be to say, oh, we're just going to take it from you. And by the way, the lawyer here mentioned that they actually explained to the prosecutors where the money came from. And I've had a lot of people say, Steve, if I'm going to buy a car and I need to bring 50 grand in cash with me, I'll go to the bank, withdraw 50 grand in cash, put it in a briefcase, and then I'll have with me the withdrawal slip, and that'll prove the money's good. No, it won't. That by itself won't do it. Because, number one, you could be going to break the law with the money. They've raised that argument before. And number two, you could have gotten the money from criminal processes before you put it in the bank. So the fact that it spent time in the bank doesn't exonerate it of all your bad acts. What are you, crazy? And they've actually said that. They've actually said, we're taking the money from the guy because he might be about to commit a crime with it. And obviously, if you committed a crime and put the money in the bank, that doesn't make the money suddenly clean. But this is a very good result. And with more publicity and more cases like this, perhaps the tide will start to turn. Maybe. We can hope. So again, this is from the Institute for Justice. They're great people. They're doing great work on this. New Orleans man will get his life savings back. Federal government agrees to dismiss case, clearing his name by Andrew Weimer. And thank you to everybody who sent it to me. Probably 75 or 80 people sent it. So thank you very much. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. You can't just give up. Is that what a dinosaur would do?